Joining me now in studio is Matteo Mazzao. Welcome to Silver Screen, Matteo.
Thanks.
Now, recently you guys released your 5 pillars in terms of what Ster Kinekor want to do with regards to building skills and talent in the film industry. Let's start at the top. The first one was skills and talent pipelines for the future. Right. Tell me a little bit about this one. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so I think the approach we took, Robert, is we looked at the movie industry as a supply chain.
Okay.
So, and in that supply chain, there's different divisions. It helps nobody in the industry if we, for example, as exhibitors, right at the end of that supply chain process, don't have input or can't influence what we know customers want. So the skills development part is that in part. Secondly, there's a development of the market. We need to develop customers and consumers for TV, for cinema, and theater, etc. So it's about building, a culture with the audiences, but also building the right skills to produce the right content for that audience.
Now you say building a culture. Where do you perceive yourselves as building that film culture that didn't exist previously? What market specifically are you talking about?
So this is something we debate about a lot in the office weekly. The younger audience don't have an affinity with film, you know.
Well, with cinema.
With cinema.
Yeah.
The older, and again, it depends where people come from, where they grew up, and what was around, what they socialized. But youth, today's youth, don't have an affinity because they've had from day one, they've had a plethora of options in terms of how to consume content. So that is certainly a place to start. Outside main sort of cities is a place to definitely go. So even into rural. In fact, we're working on a few projects where we are going to try and bring cinema to
rural areas
and peri-urban areas through pop-up cinemas and stuff like that.
Because if you think about it, the previously disadvantaged audience was never really exposed to the cinema the way the advantaged audience was. Yes. So that is an area that could definitely be developed. How do you see yourself taking cinema to them, though?
Okay, so the first thing is we start at the end. They want to see stories that are relevant to them.
Okay.
We need, and hence the 5 pillars, we need as an industry to produce that content that's relevant to them. Now, this is not to say the content is not there, but it's not all cinema fit, if you like.
Sure.
And some of it is for TV, is made for TV and on smaller screens. But we need, as an industry, to produce the right content that these people want to watch, that those markets would want to watch.
How would you define the right content for those markets?
It has to be local.
Okay.
It's local stories. People like seeing themselves in their own stories. And we've seen, this is not a South African phenomenon only. We've seen this across the continent, the growth of Nollywood. We've seen it in countries like India and Russia.
But let me stop you there, and not to be argumentative, but with regards to the Nollywood model, Nollywood have structures in place whereby a certain percentage of all cinema has to be local. In other words, they've put quota systems in place, which is what's really developed that market. So are you guys potentially talking about maybe putting a quota system in place? Because let's face it, that's not a bad idea.
Right. As an exhibitor, we would have no authority to do so.
But what sort of quota would you look at potentially if a quota was put in place? Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, I would go 60-40.
60% international, 40% local.
Absolutely.
I'm with you.
Absolutely. And only because I would want to give the market an opportunity to grow. Ideally, it should be the other way around, to be fair. So I think initially, if there was a quota, I would have no authority to do so, but if I did, it would be around 60-40.
But are you guys in talks with government in terms of instituting some kind of a quota?
Right. So these 5 pillars are exactly about that, to bring all the role players, and that's why I spoke about that conveyor belt or supply chain. And in there is government or governmental type institutions. We've got the NFVF, which represents, if you like, sort of government, because they're the authority on, and they are very willing to work with us. We engage them a lot, and I say we as Ster Kinekor, we engage them a lot. And so I think there is going to be support from that. Okay. We've seen it lately with local content. When good local content
Keeping
comes
up
out.
the Kandasamis is doing phenomenal
business.
Exactly.
Kalushi.
It's sitting on 10 million.
Yep. Kalushi is doing extremely well.
It's not doing as well, I mean, in terms of what the budget for Kalushi was.
Absolutely. But I think it will come. And the reason I'm bringing those up as an example is because we have seen governmental departments that were involved in the funding, for example, of the movie, being involved in marketing it, being involved in making people come see the movie. So I don't think it would be a problem to get support from government.
Okay. And what are your other, you talk about skills development as well. Now, as an ex-filmmaker myself, I could perceive that as being somewhat condescending, because we do have skilled filmmakers in this country. So when you say skills development, what are you talking about specifically? Because I mean, our artisans in this country are some of the most skilled in the world. They're working on international Hollywood projects every year. So when you say Ster Kinekor are going to swoop in and sort of start upskilling people, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, okay, so first let me just say, that is not the approach or the attitude. We're not saying we're going to swoop in and do this. And that's why we're saying we're just an exhibitor.
Okay.
Our role, however, should not be limited to being just an exhibitor, because we are we're the cold face of who the consumer interacts with, and we're aware of what the consumer wants. So to go back to your question, we feel that there is skill, and we've seen it, and we've seen the production, but I don't know for a fact that it's enough skill.
Okay.
I don't know that the skill that we have has the skills to produce the kind of content that's required for the country going forward.
So you're saying commercially viable content?
Commercially viable, and that's what we said. We said we need to strike a balance between the value of local content as an art form and its commercial viability.
But then define what would commercially viable content be? Because you see, again, if you look at the average South African film, which is budgeted between 3 and 5 million rand, these guys are coming out there, most of them are making under that. So there's very few films that are making any kind of return on investment. And if you're tailor making a film for a local audience, it's not going to travel. So isn't that a bit of a catch-22 situation?
It is, absolutely is. And we would need to learn from markets that have done this before. How do they export their content if that's one way of growing the consumption of that content? And again, Robert, I'm always wary by saying local content doesn't mean that it's not consumable outside the country.
Okay, I'm with
so
you.
we need to be very careful when we say that. So for me, the question around commercial viability is, will the film make back the money that it's required to make back? And what does it take for that film to do so? You're right, the budgets are 3-4 million rand and people come in at less. And as an industry, we need to look at that. At the end of the day, we all subject ourselves to one person, and that's the consumer. And they're the people who vote on how on the content and what they want to watch. Collaboratively, as an industry, we should be able to understand that consumer deep enough to produce the right stuff. And I think if we start with that, with that end in mind, we're already winning the battle. But I also don't want us to sound like we're saying local content is inferior and or is only suitable for the South African audience. No, it must be the same way we consume Hollywood. Our content should also be exportable.
What about with regards to local content as a potential business model? You guys are exhibitors, cutting back your revenue stream from a local perspective, or offering local filmmakers a longer run, a guaranteed longer run, in order to make their money back. So with an international, I mean, I know you're a business like any other business. If a movie's doing well at the box office, you're going to leave it with a certain number of screens. If it's underperforming, you're going to cut those screens. Maybe with a local model, you'd look at giving them a little bit longer to make their money back, as it were.
So, absolutely. And by the way, that's not something we're not already doing. We are already doing something like that. But and then again, you've raised a very important question, because the argument we always have, especially with local filmmakers, is the number of screens versus the quality of screens.
Okay, I'm with you.
So I think we need to be very careful when you speak about number of screens, because I think there's a misconception that if you've got all the screens in the world,
you're going to do Bofo business. It's not
true. Necessarily right. The discussions that we should be having is the movie showing in the right place for the right audience, for the audience it's meant for. I've had a few chats. I mean, I haven't been in the industry that long, but I've had a few chats where I've asked the filmmaker, so who's this movie aimed at? And guess what the response I get?
Everyone.
Precisely.
No, I know, I've had those discussions.
Now, what do I do with everyone? You understand?
Yeah.
And you're right, we are a business, and we also try to do that. I've got examples of local films that started on X number of screens, and after week 1 and 2, when they were performing well, we increased the number of screens. But again, I'll reiterate, it's not about the number of screens. It's the quality and the location of those screens.
And aren't you guys worried about cinema becoming obsolete? I mean, cinema is the exhibition dinosaur at the moment. If you think about kids, I mean, even myself, I'm exposed to all these new, formats, whether it's Netflix, Amazon, streaming formats. Isn't that the future? Isn't cinema going to go the way of the dinosaur ultimately?
So there's a question behind that question. The question is, can any of those platforms offer the experience of cinema? It depends who you speak to. I'm not scared. I don't think we are scared that cinema will go obsolete. I think there's a lot of room for cinema. There's a lot of room for growth.
Yeah.
What we need to do is to approach this with a game theory approach as an industry.
Yeah.
Because the more content people consume, the more platforms they consume it on. So the issue here, and people can argue that maybe cinema is at the front of those that are that stands to be the biggest loser in the long run. But we should all be scared. If that's the case, then we should all be scared.
Sure.
And the question is, what should we all be doing as an industry to make sure that it may start with cinema. It's argued that it's been said for the last 50 years that cinema, since the advent of TV, that cinema is declining. It's still here.
The numbers are still up.
It's still up. It's still here. So I would be very careful if I were in any other video content space to not worry and leave it up to cinema to worry about. I think everybody's in danger, not just cinema.
Mateo, thank you so much for joining us.